welcome everybody. My name is John Restakis. I will be the moderator for this and the following 9 lectures in this series. It is a unique privilege. I've been asked to take this role. I'm very happy to participate in this lecture series. I am a co-founder of Synergia Cooperative Institute, and I am also a lecturer at the University of Victoria on the subject of alternative economies for social change. And one of the subjects that I lecture on is indeed Rojava, the revolution in Rojava. This series is part of the 2023 South Dialogue for Sustainability, which has been organized by Global University for Sustainability. And this particular lecture series is co-sponsored by Synergia Cooperative Institute, by the Global University for Sustainability, and by the Civil Center for Diplomacy in the Autonomous Administration of North East Syria. The title of this particular, the whole series is titled Rojava, Resistance, Resilience, and Renewal, Democratic Confederalism, and the Changing Face of Revolution. I will be introducing Jade, who will be giving a more fulsome overview of the series. But I would like first to request participants to mute their mics if they're on the call and they are not speaking. I would also like to say that there will be instantaneous translation into English and also Arabic. So the 3 languages that you may choose to listen to are English, Kurdish, or Arabic. And you can choose which language you would prefer to listen to by selecting the language out of the interpreter button. And that is the little button at the bottom of your screen with a little globe symbol on it. So the way the lecture will proceed is our speaker will speak for 1.5 hours. It's a special introductory lecture, so it'll be longer than usual. Most of the following lectures will be about an hour. This one will be for 1.5 hours because it's a foundational lecture on both the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan and the history of the Kurdish people and their struggle in Syria. That will be followed by a response from our speaker, our respondent. And then we will have an opportunity for a question and answer period that will follow. Our keynote speaker today is Dr. Hassan, who is also the vice of the co-chair of the Executive Council of North East Syria. He is a lecturer at the University of Rojava, at Al-Sharq University, and the Democratic Society Academies. And our first respondent for these lectures is going to be, I will just get his bio up in front of me here. Is Mahmoud Patel. Mahmoud is a legal scholar, an academic and human rights activist. He is the chairperson of the Kurdish Human Rights Action Group in South Africa. So that is our speaker and our respondent. And I will now turn the mic over to Jade from the Global University, who will say a few words, and that will be followed by a few words from our good friends at the Center for Civil Diplomacy in Rojava. So Jade, would you like to say your introductory comments, please?
My name is Sichoy Jadi Margaret. On behalf of Global University for Sustainability, we are honored to work with the Civil Diplomacy Center in North and East Syria and Synergy Cooperative Institute to organize the South-South Dialogue on Sustainability, Rojava, Resistance, Resilience, and Renewal, Democratic Confederalism, and the Changing Face of Revolution. We welcome all of you to join this lecture series. Global U is an international network of around 200 renowned scholars activists with a substantial number from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, apart from those from Europe and North America. They are academic scholars, peace activists, community workers, food producers, and rural reconstruction promoters, among others. Since 2011, Global U has organized the South-South Forum on Sustainability with over 10 co-organizing universities and institutions from China and overseas. The forum is a platform for dialogues and exchange among grassroots and resistance practice in the production, dissemination, and use of knowledge as instrument of problematization and self-organization, as well as interactions among thinkers in search of paradigms for peace and justice. Since 2020, Global U has organized South-South Dialogue on Sustainability series, such as Venezuela in Struggles, Experience with Indigenous Communities in Chiapas, African People's Struggles for Liberation, and Constructing Alternative Paradigms in Brazil. All proceedings of the forums and dialogues were video recorded and uploaded to the Global U websites. I will type the links of the dialogues in the chat room for your reference later. We hope all kinds of views and ideas working for sustained peace and well-being of the people, especially those who are oppressed and marginalized, can be articulated and heard. Genuine peace and nonviolence are what humanity urgently needs today. Let us respect different positions, debate on different views with openness and tolerance for difference, and make an effort to work together. Global U offers a platform for open discussion and debate for different positions, and views of speakers in dialogue do not necessarily represent views and positions of the organizers. We hope you will enjoy the lectures and the discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jade. And Noshan, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the center, please?
We'd like to thank everyone. And on the name of the Diplomatic Center, the Social Diplomatic Center of Northeastern Syria, we would like to welcome all the participants. And we would like to welcome everyone who is participating in the seminar series and gives importance to the series. We would also like to thank all those who took place in their organization, as well as their preparations. This is a project over the last 2 months and 3 months has been created, and we're very happy that today is the first day. Really, the Social Diplomacy Center of Northeastern Syria, to create these democratic relations between the people of Northeastern Syria and the rest of the world, was created on this basis, on real human values, democracy, freedom of women, and freedom of religion, and on the foundation of a system that is multi-ethnic, multinational, about a collective life between all different realities of the area, Kurds, Syrians, Armenians, Yazidis, Arabs. Everyone wants to live with their own culture within the autonomous administration, to live within the women's structures and the ecological structures that are created. And we want to increase the relationships that they have between the region as well as internationally, And that is one of our goals as the diplomatic center. We want to make the Rojava Revolution reach the entire world and give the opportunity that all democratic groups, all people, all those who desire freedom can see the results of our revolution, and the results of our revolution can be seen, and see our resistance against the fascist state. Those who fight against the culture of the people, we will accomplish our goals. With these seminars that we're organizing, we can create a clear concept for the things that have been created in Rojava and in northeastern Syria. We can make these clear and fight against the anti-propaganda that the states are distributing, that also is being spread by the international system against our revolution, especially the Turkish state, which now is occupying a large part of the geography of Rojava and is having a very comprehensive attack against our people and is continuing these attacks. We want to bring around the truth about these anti-propaganda and bring about the truth. And we have every hope that peace, and a comprehensive peace, to create our society against violence on the foundation of democracy, ecology, and the freedom of women. We again welcome all of the participants, and we desire victory from everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nushan, for those words. So let's begin formally the lecture. Hassan, please take the mic, and as soon as you're ready, we're here to listen. Thank you.
To begin, we would like to thank those who have prepared this meeting. We'd also like to thank those who are listening and participating in the meeting. And in the name of the autonomous administration, we give our thanks. To begin, as a seminar, there are a majority about the Rojava Revolution, as well as the philosophy of leader Abdullah Ocalan, Ango Reber, and its effects on the preparation and the accomplishment of the revolution of Rojava. For instance, on what philosophy was the Rojava Revolution founded upon? This is something that I will address. As you may know, the Rojava Revolution in 2011 began. Upon the foundation of the philosophy of Reber Abdullah Ocalan. To make Reber Abdullah Ocalan known, Abdullah Ocalan is a Kurdish person. In 1948, was born on the 4th of April in the Gund of Amara, in the villages around the city of Urfa. In his childhood, his search of socialization, his childhood inside of society, rejecting the previous socialization. From 7 years old and onwards, began his search for a new life and a new socialization. And his developments, which we can say over 40 years, a struggle for the Kurdish society, so that the Kurdish society can be freed from exploitation. A very difficult struggle was waged. And that struggle is still continuing to today. That is a struggle that is both military, it is both social, it is both political, so that the states that are oppressing the Kurds can speak the language of peace, can speak a political language. But these states don't understand this language of peace and this political language. On this foundation, the struggle is waged. And for this, and now more or less 22 years, that has been imprisoned in a very heavy isolation. And until now, even the lawyers who are protecting him are not allowed to visit him, nor can his family come to visit him. His situation, the Kurds are wondering, what is the situation? Now we just want to know what kind of situation is he in, because now there's no information coming out about our leader. The Kurds see Ocalan as their leader. He gave his entire life for the Kurdish society, for peace, for democracy. And we can say a history of 40 to 50 years in unrelenting struggle from the beginning of his childhood until now, just so that Kurds can live in freedom and create a democratic society. His strategy, his politics, his philosophy have all culminated in a very serious struggle. And now we know that the crime against Abdullah Ocalan, which was done by the state, everyone can see this. And now it's 22 years in the Imrali prison that he is resisting. And now the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan, what can we say about this? I want to address this. The old paradigm, which the global system is now working accord, Abdullah Ocalan criticized the system. And now the philosophical critique will address. That way we can understand the philosophy and the paradigm of Abdullah Ocalan. Now the philosophy takes its place as Paraznameh, which is defense writings. And as far as from a thought perspective, represented a very large revolution. And in his defense writings to the European Human Rights Council, as well as other defense councils, he made more than he made many defense writings. And in these defense writings, one can understand the real philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan, what kinds of revolution he wants to develop, what kinds of new thoughts he develops, and the old paradigm of the system, what we can call capitalist modernity, and the system of the nation state, we can see his criticisms. Because they aren't solving problems, because they cannot create the freedom of society. The problems of the environment, the problems of the poor and the rich, the problems of violence and killing, massacres, displacement, ethnic displacement. All of these things became evidence that the system is not working, the system is wrong. And today, the world is now going worse and worse. The world is coming towards collapse. The heat of the globe is rising. Many different kinds of sicknesses, such as cancer, corona, other kinds of sicknesses are spreading. If we could describe what its causes are, is the paradigm of the system. If that paradigm was correct, then the goal would be correct, the aim would be correct, and the praxis and strategy of itself would be correct. That means that in the logic of the system, there is some kind of flaw. With his philosophy, Abdullah Ocalan developed something, made criticisms. What is it that he wanted to develop? This is something that we will be addressing, mostly. In this seminar is mostly what I will be addressing. In history, if you calculate the paradigms that have been developed until now, the first paradigm we can take as mythology. The things that take its foundations in legends, as we can say, like the childhood of humanity. That was an important era of life. And maybe that was the era that was closest to the real life of society. Everything was alive. In many religions, that stage was lived. Everyone saw that their surroundings was alive and acted justly towards their environment. Didn't fight with each other and lived justly towards each other. If we can see the opinions of mythology in the beginning like this. However, after the development of power in the state, especially when we start from the Sumerian period, the development of religion created a different kind of life. The codification of mythology was developed, the legalification of mythology. If we discuss the social side, we can also discuss the creation of a kind of ideology that had its effect on the entire society. Yani, the force of a person was belittled. There became another force outside that of humanity. When we discuss this force, we cannot describe it as willpower, we cannot describe it as equality, we cannot describe it as freedom. And because now there is an outside force that is living for you, that is doing politics for you. And now with religion, there are also its positive sides, especially in socialization. For instance, such as morality. As far as morality, religion created positive developments. The collectivication of society, forming as a cement of society. To bring society together, we can call it like this, morality. However, as a foundation, it created a mindset that was totally within its own hands and created a society of power. Created many individuals who themselves were desiring power. Those who could put themselves into the place of God. Such as we can see in Europe with in Egypt with the pharaohs. or we can call them god kings. In the Sumerian times, it was exactly like this. And that made it so that power was seen as something celebratory. And that was something that within the thoughts of humanity itself was made with foundation. And so now a religious paradigm created a negative effect on society of itself with this power structure. The brain of humanity itself was taken captive. When the brain is taken captive, of course, it has a negative effect on the entire society. When the mindset of a person is closed, his emotions are also closed. His politics become closed, become captured. The economy becomes captured. The entirety of life is affected. And now the powerful uses these things to their advantage. Especially we can say in the Middle East, this religious politics that plays on the emotions of humans, use it to develop their own power. And now later we can see that this also developed in Europe. We can say philosophical science developed as a paradigm in Europe. In the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, that step that was taken needs to be addressed. And how one leg of dogmatism that was developed there was developed in Europe. And so that kind of scientism also had its own negative effect on society, a kind of material culture. European society had immaterial values very weakened. And it was mostly founded upon trade and material value. In the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, the thing that I want to address mostly is that in the 17th and 18th centuries were very important for Europe. Thinking about justice, thinking about the freedom of thoughts, and this kind of politics being developed. The success of the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, until the American Revolution, and Britain as well, was created upon this kind of politics. In the 17th century, there was discussion as to how does the brain think? And we can say that Descartes had a large effect on this discussion, as well as on the European brain itself. He spoke a lot about the brain and how the brain thinks. And we know that many people have been immolated for this, especially under the name of Christianity.
So a lot of people get burned alive in this time of period in history. So we can say that this shaped the thinking in Europe. So this this led to kind of a revolution carried out by those in power who wanted to push forward the idea of autonomous thinking. Especially in France, with the development of science, we can say that materialism came into practice. We can say that, of course, in Europe, there was a philosophical revolution taking place, but we need to address the contradictions. And I especially want to address the mistakes that have been done in this time of period. For example, with the French Revolution and ongoing from there on. Because, of course, there were philosophy developing. There have been many important philosophers who created important thinking in this time. But the system of the modernity, of the capitalist modernity, they used these things for their own interests. So what did the capitalist modernity do? They used these philosophies in a really negative way. We say, for example, Descartes, he's talking about object and subject. And the system of the modernity, capitalist modernity, used this division between subject and object as a basis of its system. For example, they separated the spirit from the body. And this led to a big crisis in society, we can say. So with the separation of subject and object, the philosophy in Europe created actually a system that did a really negative effect on the people and society. How did this happen? How did this creation of philosophy, how did this affect the society? So actually what happened is like subject was like the state and the object became the people, the society. Subject was the man, object was the woman. This is a mentality that created a really, really serious problem. The world was divided into poor and rich. It was people who have power, who have like their seats in power and against the people. And until today, the system of the whole world is according to the split into subject and object. On the one hand side, we have those in power, and on the other hand side, we have the oppressed people. And there's a constant war between those. And even if we look on like the most democratic systems, they still have parts of the system inside them. So in history and also in politics, we can see this really clearly, who was part of like the object and part of the subject. So when we look into the trade system of capitalism, we can see that this separation has been turned into a systematic way. So through philosophy, this system was intended to be accepted by the people, so that the people by themselves agree that there must be people being oppressed and there must be people in power. There must be some who have like the most luxury life, having a lot of houses, and that there must be people who don't have anything. And this you can see in the whole world. I'm sure everyone who's joining this seminar today knows this. So what is happening is that a system was built on the separation between subject and object. And Abdullah Ocalan is criticizing this. The system of democratic confederalism developed on basis of critics to this separation between subject and object. We say it cannot be that this separation is being made. There cannot be a power system that is dividing people in oppressed people and the one in power. So this is one of the core elements of our philosophy. On the other hand side, we can see in all the wars that are happening in the world that all the reasons of these wars is the capitalist modernity. Riba Abdullah Ocalan is criticizing this. What is modernity? Modernity is connected to truth. Modernity is something that needs to create one reality, one truth. But now, in modernity, what happened is that something like important things like love, like morality, they have all been taken out. And everything was focused on intelligence. But when we are talking about these important values, we're talking about metaphysics. We cannot deny metaphysics. When we just look on like intelligence-wise, we can explain everything. We can explain everything like according to mathematics, everything. But Riba Abdullah Ocalan is criticizing this. He says we cannot explain everything just with analytic intelligence. Of course, it's important. Intelligence is really important. We need it. We need knowledge. We need science. Of course, it needs to be developed. But we also need emotional intelligence. We know that every human being has those two parts, emotional and analytic intelligence. And we cannot allow that there's a separation going on between those parts that every human being has. We need this emotional intelligence. We need love. We need feelings. We need emotions. We need strong reactions. We need all of this. These things, they are all bound to the emotional intelligence. But when we look on the analytic intelligence, it's actually calculating. It's mathematics, it's physics. It's like estimating. So Riba Abdullah Ocalan says that with cutting those parts from each other, actually the human being is losing. He's losing a big important strength. He is actually becoming someone without strength. So when those two parts are being cut from each other, we are losing. The human being is becoming weak. And actually it's becoming into a problem. It's turning into a problem. So we can never allow that the feelings are cut from our intelligence. This is a serious sickness that is spreading all over the world. We need that our feelings are connected to our intelligence. And this separation is actually causing a really negative influence on all the people. It causes a separation within society. This is why science became without any ethical standards. This is why when you look in Europe, there are people who are making science, politics, they don't have any ethical values. Ethical values were deleted from politics. They were deleted from society because this separation happened. So we can say that the separation between emotional intelligence and analytic intelligence has a really negative effect. What Abdullah Ocalan is saying is we need to combine those. We need to combine those in order to carry out politics based on ethical principles. We need to build a system which is based on ethical principles. Because we say actually society can never be without morality, can never be without ethical principles. This is why Abdullah Ocalan is saying this is so important. The worldwide systems, when we look on the different nation states in the world, we can every day we can see that on an individual level we are facing problems. So when we see a global problem, it is not cut from the global situation. The individual situation, the situation of every individual in our global system is bound to the global system itself. We cannot analyze them cut apart from each other. So what is it what human beings are bringing together? One is morality and ethical principles. A human being needs ethical principles. For example, if you feel shame. Another thing is respect and dignity. If there is no respect and the feelings of shame in a society, then we can actually say this society is not a society. The drives of humans are actually like animals. If we don't control them, it's like animals. But there are also two things that are really important when we talk about human beings. This is shame and respect. So the basis of humanity can be found in these principles. And Reba Abdullah Ocalan is saying, ethics is the universality of society.
The thing that makes society bound together, what makes society strong and defends values itself, is ethics. And that is something that is related to the nature of society itself. In Kurdish, we say natural society, or the nature of society. A society that loses its own nature, what will happen to the society? Nothing under the name of society will remain. The nature of society, one is ethics. That is something universal between all societies, whether it's natural society, class society, Arab society, Kurdish society, whichever society. One of the foundations is ethics. And then the universality, the things that Abdullah Ocalan talks about, the universality of society. And one is also politics. The politics of the oppressor is stealing from the politics of society. What does politics is society itself, and has been stolen from the society. The oppressors create a bureaucracy, create a rule of law. The people who come onto these oppressors work with laws. They don't work with politics. And this is how Abdullah Ocalan describes politics. Politics, according to the world, is what? However much you protect your interests, however much you protect your power, that's how strong your politics are. That's how the world describes it. As well as the art of the lie, the art of deception. It's said that those who lie the most are politicians. They say they make their jokes with democracy. They always talk about peace, they always talk about democracy, they always talk about equality. But of course, they do the exact opposite of everything. They're the ones who create the most war. They're the ones who sell the most weapons. They're the ones who fight each other the most. They're the ones who create the most violence, is the oppressors by themselves. And so politics is itself related to the natural society, the nature of society, not with the powerful. Politics, what does this mean? Politics and to think is a meeting. The nature of society, to think as a society that cannot think for itself cannot become political. If a society is political, that means it must think for itself. To think, to be aware, and to be political are united with each other. If you remove politics from humanity, that means you also take away its thoughts. And so the description of Abdullah Ocalan for politics is the art of freedom. To do all the good works for society. To develop the culture of both material as well as meaning, metaphysical culture. Politics is related to ethics, related to the nature of society. So we say this, a society that is not political, Abdullah Ocalan can describe this, a society that is not political. A society that is not political does not exist. However rich they are, however much they eat or drink, however many things they own, how many castles they have, however many skyscrapers they have, however nice their material situation is, they are slaves. A society that is not political is a slave society because they don't think. To think and to be political are united. And this is why we say that politics is related to the nature of society. The third part is what? Democracy. Democracy is itself socialization. There are many different kinds of descriptions for democracy. It's become one of those words that everyone uses. Everyone uses this word for their own interests. And everyone is trying to deceive. In fact, the people who most frequently talk about democracy are the oppressors, trying to deceive the society. It has become a tool. But what is real democracy? For instance, we can say democracy in the Greek language. Demos being the people, krasi being the rule of the people. For instance, that is what the oppressors are doing. is creating their power over the people, and not the people creating their own power. The oppressors see democracy as a fundamental threat. Rojava describes democracy as so, that democracy protects justice. And that democracy is the justice of society itself. Democracy is not a political system. It is the justice of society itself. If there's no justice within the society itself, how can it call itself democracy? If there's no justice. And now, so what's the cause of the wars in the world? Now in every country there is war. If there isn't a military war, there's other kinds of war. What are the causes for these wars? Injustice, lack of democracy. The reason for war is injustice. That is causing the wars. If anyone in any country says, I want to develop democracy, the first thing they need to develop is justice. Because democracy itself is justice. In a country, we can take any country in the entire world. There's many countries. When we look at any country, how much justice is there, really? However much justice there is, that's the same amount of democracy there is. Abdullah Ocalan describes democracy as such. However much justice there is, that's how much democracy there is. Equality and justice. If there is justice, of course, then there will be equality. However, the things that are developing now, you cannot talk about justice or equality. It's very weak. In many cases, it's totally absent. And that is what is causing these wars to be created. A poor person looks at the rich person, sees the rich person has everything, he has nothing, and he fights. Abdullah Ocalan says that however much democracy there is, there's justice. However much justice there is, there's democracy. And one of the fundamental points of Abdullah Ocalan is this. At the same time, however much democracy develops, the same amount, the strength of the state is weakened. That is the fundament for Abdullah Ocalan's paradigm of philosophy. If you want to understand his philosophy, you can sit on this formula. However many social institutions, however many democratic institutions there are in a society, however democratic society is, that the weaker the state gets. However strong the state gets, that's how small the democracy gets. And this is one of the foundations of the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan. I'll say another formula related to this system. However much freedom there is, that much oppression is little. However much oppression there is, that much freedom is little. The more oppression there is in a country, you cannot even talk about freedom. And whoever talks about freedom is, of course, lying to themselves. Power and freedom oppose each other. If we want to develop freedom, we have to weaken power. And if power wants to remove freedom, then of course it has to increase its own power. That is also a formula that Abdullah Ocalan has addressed. From another angle, the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan regarding women. For instance, we talked about how first power created itself above the society and put all of society under its oppression. One of the first targets was, of course, the enslavement of women. That was itself an entire era of society, which was the enslavement of women. Women in the current system, the capitalist system, we can say the capitalist modernity, women have become a tool. A tool to sell things. Under the name of freedom, oppressing women. Under the name of justice, under the name of women's freedom, selling women. Using women as a tool for themselves. And this, the woman loses. That politic that is being waged against women is itself being waged against the entire society. And that's why Abdullah Ocalan says that the woman herself is society. An attack against women is attack against society. If you want to destroy the society, then you should target the woman. And the level of a society is, of course, directly related to the level of the women within society. If we want to describe correctly, we have to approach a bit logically. The opinion of Rebbe Apo is this. Looking at the socialization of women herself. When women were slaves, the society was enslaved. Now, if you look at the global system of women, it has become a kind of meta slavery, becoming a tool that is used. In the public houses, also known as brothels, being used in cinema, being used in films, being used in other kinds of bad films. And what does she become? She becomes a tool for the man. Rebbe Ocalan doesn't accept this. He says that woman, as a person, is beautiful. If you want to live with her, you have to accept her as a friend and as a person. And it has nothing to do with something physical. That's how the world understands it physically, but it's incorrect. Rebbe Abdullah Ocalan says that woman is the best friend. But how can she be the best friend? As a free woman, as a strong woman, as an organized woman, a woman who defends herself. And in the Rojava Revolution, that has become one of our most fundamental principles that everyone knows. With the creation of YPG, fighting against ISIS, was women protecting herself upon the basis of the philosophy of Rebbe Ocalan. We can see that when a woman turns 18, joins YPG, and fights against ISIS, is not something random, it's upon a philosophy. The philosophy of Rebbe Abdullah Ocalan isn't something meta, isn't something abstract. It is the society itself. When you attack the society, you're attacking the women. If you look incorrectly at women, you're looking incorrectly at the society itself. And this is one of the realities of society. And we can see that in the Rojava Revolution, we can see that the organization of women, the Kochar system, the YPG military forces, women in their councils, with the women councils, women have strengthened themselves with their organizational powers. However, the system of modernity attacks women by trying to say we will give you your rights, that we protect women's rights, with justification of freedom, really making large attacks on women. Women's freedom is now seen as something that to have the freedom of selling their bodies. And saying the more you sell yourself, the freer you are. Abdullah Ocalan, regarding women and the criticisms of the system, are on this foundation. And now I will address a couple of the other problems. And now we will talk a bit about the problem of overpopulation. Now, with billions of humans have been born, one of its fundamental causes is our approach to women. Women have become a mechanism just to produce children. And because of this, it has become a reason that the population of the world has been drastically increased. If you take it from an ecological perspective, this overpopulation is becoming a tool of the oppressors to increase the amount of money they have. For instance, to destroy a huge forest, they can receive millions and millions of dollars. They do not see it as an attack against the environment. They just see it as money to be made. For instance, the oxygen that those trees give to people, 40 people can live off of 40 trees. However, we can see how much the water has been poisoned, how much the air has been poisoned. The world has gotten to a point that is being very damaged in the ecological sphere. And now we can see that humanity is destroying its own nest. How can a person destroy its own nest, the place that he lives? And now humanity, with its own hands, has reached its own level. With our own hands, we're destroying our own nest. We're destroying our own place. And how far will this continue is currently unknown. It's very dangerous. The air is being poisoned, the cities are sprawling. The world is heating, sickness is spreading. Thousands of sicknesses are being created. And one of its fundamental problems is the incorrect approach of the powerful male against woman. For his own profit, for his own interests, can destroy land, can destroy the land. However, the future of humanity is then cast into danger. And if this is not solved, then the world itself is becoming irreparably damaged. Now, all of these meetings that are so-called for the environment, the people going to these meetings for the so-called environment are the ones that are destroying the environment themselves. And that's why we have to take our own precautions. If we don't take precautions, then the situation of the world will worsen. We see that every day it gets worse. And this is all as a result of the intervention that human has made into the environment. Nature itself is alive, and we should see it like this. If I was nature and I saw all the attacks that humanity was making, I myself would respond. I would be angry. And now we can see that nature itself is angry against us. And nature itself is making its own intervention. Nature itself is defending its own freedom. And Reber Abdullah Ocalan addressed this specifically. And says that if humanity attacks nature, then the world itself will slowly worsen the environment. We should not see our actions as separated from the environment. And this was something that was addressed very specifically, the ecological struggle. In Grek, we need to protect the entire world. We should not allow the nest that we live in to be destroyed. The other thing, the youth. Reber Ocalan specifically mentions the youth. Is that the youth are used very extensively all over the world. For instance, they're used as soldiers for so-called defense. They're seen as unintelligent, that they don't know anything, that they can only fight. And Reber Abdullah Ocalan denies this and says that the youth are the dynamic of the society. If you destroy the youth, you ruin the society. To organize the youth, to defend the youth, to develop the youth, is the development of the society. For instance, we can take the youth revolution of 1968 as an example. We can see the power of the youth. The system says that the youth don't know anything, that the youth are powerless, that the youth don't have experience. However, we see that when you destroy the dynamic of society in the form of the youth, you damage the society itself. And that's why it's necessary that the youth themselves become organized to serve the society, to serve the nation, to develop the nation, to develop the society. The youth themselves must develop themselves, to organize themselves. And we should not approach the youth incorrectly. I would like to address a few other points. So why did Rojava Ocalan see the necessity for a new paradigm? There have been many European philosophers who, of course, inside the seminar have been addressed as well. There have been many philosophers with many different kinds of philosophies, many different schools of thought, in many different countries. After the approach of Rojava Ocalan became a philosophy that found its basis in the value of society itself, became a kind of alternative. For instance, there is a philosopher by the name of Ferdinand, who is French. From a historical perspective, Rojava Abdullah Ocalan took a lot of inspiration from his historical perspectives. However, saw that his perspectives were unable to completely escape the paradigm of the capitalist modernity. There were certain investigations that Rojava Ocalan did in relation to history. For instance, Murray Bookchin, in addressing ecology, the threat of urbanization against society, that had a very big effect on Ocalan, and a very good effect. However, was unable to develop an alternative to the system, was only able to criticize the system. For instance, criticized urbanization, but as an alternative to urbanization, was not able to develop an alternative. It was not developed to a large extent. For instance, there have been many other philosophers, as just mentioned. However, both from socialization, both from their modernity, both from their time and place, created lots of interesting developments. However, if they do not become an alternative to the things that they criticize, if they only criticize, it becomes a problem. For instance, their philosophy themselves is very important, and the criticisms that they make are, of course, correct. However, if they could not create the alternative, they could not create a new system and lived within the existing modernity. And so that was one of the primary criticisms of Rojava Ocalan. He gave lots of value to the criticisms that were made. And said that the things that they were saying were very important, very necessary, and that people could learn a lot from them. However, they could not create this alternative. It only remained in the realm of theory. And if theory doesn't have its practice, it doesn't become implemented. You must implement the praxis, you must create a strategy, you must create the implementation for a theory, and you must struggle. And so the opinion of Rojava Abdullah Ocalan was mostly within the scope of those things that I will mention. And we don't have so much time. We can say that specifically, what does Rojava address, especially for democratic confederalism? Firstly, as I said at the beginning, the inacceptance and the criticism of power and oppression. The separation between object and subject. The system of democratic confederalism is about diversity. Every single reality having its own willpower. Democratic confederalism is this, is the society. The second, Abdullah Ocalan especially talks about justice and democracy in society. And that the power system has its target, or that democratic confederalism has its goal itself within the empowerment of the society and creates its basis in the democracy of the society. And that any parties that are created have to give their strength towards a democratic politics. Another point that is very fundamental is freedom of women. The approach of Rebbe Ocalan for women, for the freedom of women, to remove all kinds of slavery, and seeing the fundament of all kinds of freedom being the freedom of women. If women are slaves, then there's political slavery. There will both be political slavery as well as social and economic slavery. Another fundamental, of course, is ecology. Rebbe Ocalan says very openly in his defense writings, in the defense writings of Rebbe Abdullah Ocalan, this is where we're getting all these materials from. And everyone who joins the Javin, we can send these resources to the friends, they can see this. Ecology is one of the most fundamental points, and very important, as well as defense of ecology, defense of nature. Coming out against the destruction of one's own nest, against the destruction of one's own planet. The defense of ecology is seen as one of the fundamental points of the philosophy. The approach to women's freedom is, of course, like this. Women's freedom and freedom of society are connected to each other, as well as knowledge and freedom themselves are connected. The more knowledge you have, the more developed your freedom becomes. Those who themselves don't know or are uneducated cannot free themselves. The more you educate yourself, the more you can become free. Rebbe Ocalan sees freedom like this. Says that the freedom of a person is related to the person themselves. However, individual freedoms, as well as communal freedoms, are connected to each other and not separated from each other. The freedom that is spread over the entire world is now seen as this individualistic freedom, individual freedoms. However, the values of society have been destroyed. The power of society, of course, has been weakened. The balance between the individual and society has been ruined. And however free the society is how free the individual is. However free the individual is needs to be how free the society is. A single person is a cell of the society. A cell that is cut from the society cannot live by itself. However free you are, that is how free your society is. Within this scope is the opinion of Rojava Ocalan. And the last point that I will make our revolution is not like the revolution of the 20th century. Abdullah Ocalan sees this as a transformation in revolution itself. In the 20th century and the revolutions before, were upon the foundation of changing those in power. For instance, taking away those in power and in their place putting others in power. And then after this, of course, to discuss freedom. However, that revolution itself cannot create freedom. You cannot create freedom by changing the dictator. The scope of revolution itself has become changed. The description of revolution itself has become changed, and in Rojava we see its example. We created a new model. Revolution is not when you destroy the state and make your state in its place. When you destroyed the state and you made your own state in its place, you're just like the old state. And because of this, Abdullah Ocalan describes as such. Says this is the philosophical description of revolution. Not just the destruction of a state and replacing it with another state. No. The creation of a democratic society, of a free society. If a revolution doesn't create a democratic society and a free society, it's not a revolution. Its name would instead be the destruction of society. It would be the change of hands of power. A revolution needs to create society. It needs to have its goal in the freedom of society itself. And this is one of the reasons that other revolutions have failed to bring about success. Instead of the old dictator, they put in a new dictator. And so this is why, especially in Rojava, we didn't take the goal to destroy the Syrian state and then in its place create another state. That was not our goal. It was instead on the formula that I mentioned at the beginning. However much you have democracy, that is how weak the state gets. However many democratic institutions you have within your society, the strength of the state becomes weakened. We're not going to destroy the state and then create a new state in its place. Our revolutionary model also applies to the revolutionaries themselves. We want to create a moral and ethical society. When the society itself becomes moral and ethical, then that society can create its own system. And so that's why we want to create the Democratic Confederalism system. And in Rojava, all people live with each other under this system. There's Kurds, there's Alawis, there's Assyrians, there's Arabs. We have a co-chair system with men and women struggling together. The military forces are comprised of all different nationalities. We have our own special military force for the defense of women, YPG. And all of those things take their foundation from the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan. And if it wasn't for that, we couldn't have won the Rojava Revolution. Because we gain our strength from the philosophy of Ibn Ocalan. We take our strength from the democratic powers. And instead of destroying society, we struggle to create society. Regardless of how many attacks, as you all know, are being waged against us now. And in fact, the attack that we're in currently, the attacks of the Turkish state that are bombing civilians with their airplanes. They want to destroy our democratic project. They want to take us into their sights. They want to make us a target. Want to create another subject and object with their attacks against our society. And so our basis is this philosophy, and upon this philosophy, we'll create even more development, and we will continue our struggle. And within Rojava, as well as inside Syria, we will create our confederal system, our democratic system. I think that was the end of my time, and I won't take much more of your time.
No, you have a few more minutes. Take 5 more minutes.
Tamam. So then I will finish. Okay. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Rojava Revolution, because we didn't mention it enough until now. So the beginning, when we started the Rojava Revolution, we started it on the basis of our wish for building up a democratic system. And you need to know that at this time, there were really hard attacks on us. The Syrian state, of course, did not accept this. The Turkish state attacked us. And of course, other armed groups like Al-Nusra Front and ISIS. So we were under these hard attacks, but what we did is we were building up a society. We were building up the autonomous administration of North and East Syria. So we have built a system and what is happening is that we are also having some errors in the system, because we are coming from a society that was taught with the ideas and philosophy of the capitalist modernity. And of course, when you look in the history of the Middle East, it's also a history of power and oppression. So of course, this is still having influence on us, on our society. We made huge steps. Our democratic system is like a great success. We have achieved freedom, democratic society. We increased like the will of the people. We made like administration organized in different councils. We have our own education system. This is all what we built up in the last years. So we established a system within the Rojava Revolution that is built on the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan. And this is what we can say, the Rojava Revolution is successful because we have a philosophy. We took the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan as a basis. And this is, from this, we started with creating the revolution. But until today, there is a big threat against us. They want to encircle Rojava. They want to attack Rojava from all the sides, from the side of Turkey, the Syrian state, from southern Kurdistan. Everyone wants actually to put pressure on us, to attack us, and we need to resist. We are resisting. We are resisting in a political way, in a military way, in a social way. We will protect our revolution, because our revolution is the value of our martyrs. When I'm not wrong, it's 14,000 martyrs that we gave to build up this revolution. And we can say it's around 20 to 30,000 war veterans who were wounded in the war. And these are the sacrifices that we gave to reach this current level. Of course, we had the support of democratic forces of all the world. We will never ever forget this. This is from great value to us. And when we hear you, when we know that you are following the situation here and supporting us, this is for us a really, really great value. But we also know that the international powers, they will never accept a real democratic system. But we will insist on our democratic system, and we want to thank you that you are supporting our project. So in the name of the autonomous administration, I will tell you, like, thank you for supporting us, and we feel deeply connected to you, and I want to say thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you so much for your time and your commitment and your work and sharing your thoughts. Very, very important, fundamental presentation on the philosophical framework that has guided your efforts in Rojava. So let me turn now to Mahmoud Patel, who will offer some reflections in response to Hassan's lecture. Mahmoud, can you take the mic, please?
Thank you very much, Moderator Restakis. My profound thanks to the Civil Diplomacy Center for hosting this very important series, together with the Global University for Sustainability, as well as Synergia, and most importantly to Comrade Hassan Kochar, who presented us for the greater part of 2 hours the philosophy, as well as the brief discussion on the praxis of that philosophical ideas of leader Abdullah Ocalan and what is taking place in Rojava currently. There are important key issues for us to consider as propounded by our presenter, Hassan Kochar. He traces the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan from his prison writings 1, 2, and 3, and touches a lot, as well as on his 21st century writings on self-defense, as well as his ideas based post his incarceration and the revolutionary development of radical democracy, democratic confederalism, self-determination of the Kurdish people and all peoples. So the grounding that you have given us with regards to the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan and the development of that in your hour and a half focus on his philosophy, embrace the ideas of ethics, morality, philosophy, freedom of the individual, as well as freedom of a community and society from the traditional revolutions that took place to replace dictators as opposed to creating a society of freedom, justice, ethics, and morals. The emphasis on Leader Abdullah Ocalan's ideas and philosophy on the freedom of women, especially genealogy, and the study of that together with the praxis in the co-chair leadership structures in the autonomous administration, as well as your brief mentions of the YPG, as well as the successes against the regime, ISIL, Daesh, and maintaining a bulwark for the people of Rojava against the Turkish ethnic cleansing, genocide, and conduct from the invasion and occupation of Afrin, as well as its incursions in 2019 and occupying 30 kilometers into your territory. You have touched on all those issues in a philosophical way and linked towards the global struggles, war, famine, genocide, gender-based violence, as well as the struggles we have in Africa post-colonialism, as well as in South Africa post-apartheid. So the relevance of the philosophy of Abdullah Ocalan and the experiment that's taking place in Rojava is a critical and crucial one going forward in this century and millennia. It provides us much more than the Marxist dialectic, as well as the foundations of the PKK in the 70s, until it developed its new ideology under the thinking, guidance, and leadership of Abdullah Ocalan. So if we look at the issues raised by Abdullah Ocalan, he tells us categorically in the text, as you pointed out, his struggles as an exemplar and an ideal for us in this century going forward for the struggles we have in different communities and societies globally. In the Kurdish question in the 21st century, Abdullah Ocalan resonates with that great revolutionary who was incarcerated as well almost a century ago, Gramsci, when he said the new has yet to be born. Abdullah Ocalan tells us very clearly in his text that his imprisonment meant that the Republic and the people have been reborn. And that rebirth is taking place in Rojava. Abdullah Ocalan tells us the second birth has taken place through violence and war, like some kind of catharsis. The battle against the oligarchic republic was long and violent. It followed into a new era when we will establish a new and radical democratic alternative, like we are seeing taking place in Rojava. Abdullah Ocalan further tells us that the whole of social life, like you have explained to us, the state, the economy, the politics, justice, art, and even ethics have been rocked and are looking for a way out of this crisis. So it's important then to acknowledge the work that's taking place with Rojava, or de facto the autonomous Northeastern administration, the experience of the revolutionary forces in the control of Northeastern Syria, who have been directly inspired by the Democratic Confederal program as articulated by Abdullah Ocalan. It provides a critical assessment of the understanding of what's been taking place, because this attempt to bring about a radically egalitarian and, as you have pointed out, ecological society is important in understanding the efforts of Rojava to construct an anti-hierarchical, ecological alternative to capitalism, the nation state from the bottom up. And that comes clearly across when you speak of the individual extending to the community, society, and the family that have given so much, as you concluded, with the thousands of martyrs to establish this revolutionary project. So the democratic confederal alternative to capitalist modernity, as well as the lessons we draw from the revolutionary praxis, as you have pointed out in the last 30 minutes, are directly relevant to addressing a fundamental question. Is governance and freedom possible in such dire times that you find yourself in Rojava and the rest of the world is struggling with? Because if capitalism and the nation state can plausibly be portrayed as a systemic cause of the unfolding climate catastrophe, as well as the struggles we have within the capitalist system, the judiciary, the courts, the international legal system, how then does this anti-imperialist conflict, or as one rightfully must understand it, radical democracy that stands out as a beacon of hope, and this that's taking place? So this critical assessment based on Abdullah Ocalan's philosophy, as you have portrayed to us in your presentation, is the program of democratic confederalism. And it's long overdue that this must be interrogated by thinkers, scholars, revolutionaries across the world, and not only those who are focused with the region. We must highlight Abdullah Ocalan's emphasis also on self-criticism within the movement, and emphasis on the need of a constant struggle. And I think that's an important and critical issue to focus on as well. And that can happen through education, consciousness raising, and that goes way back to the 80s, but was intensified after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And that has constituted a continuous theme in Abdullah Ocalan's writings, especially more so since his imprisonment. He has made a consistent effort to push the PKK and those who share that vision towards an even more radical democratic stance beyond to embrace gender equality, people empowerment. And that then takes us out of nationalism, patriarchy, authoritarianism that exists within the movement as well as without. And another important aspect corresponding to the practice of self-criticism within the movement and amongst its supporters manifests itself in these kinds of discussions, webinars, and intellectual engagement that takes place with thinkers and scholars, but more importantly, amongst the cadres themselves, who regard and analyze the mistakes and obstacles, the creeping authoritarianism, and what should be the correct implementation of democratic confederalism, and what is required of it in terms of the inspiration given by Abdullah Ocalan. The cultivation of the expression against criticisms and misgivings of this radical form of democracy is essential for the vitality to constitute a necessary safeguard against the degeneration of theoretical inspiration and revolutionary imagination into rigid dogmatic mentalities, something Abdullah Ocalan has been at the forefront as the foremost thinker of this and the past century. So when we look closely at what is taking place in the anti-capitalist project in Rojava, based on the ideals, it is creating a self-critical revolution. Indeed, one of the real strengths of the Kurdish movement is its refusal to be trapped into what it is, and the ability, like Leader Apo has expounded, to come out of those contradictions in a real Hegelian way. In your presentation, you spoke of the crisis of Europe in its development to where it is today, as well as the struggles it is still locked into itself. North America, which is the greatest ally of Turkey itself, which is instrumental in every single breach of international humanitarian law when it continues launching drones into Rojava that not only kill leaders of the movement, but also civilians, the control of natural resources and the weaponizing of water. So the project of social ecology and the project of democratic confederalism, as you inferred in your presentation, is something that must be understood in the way in which we realize the works of Abdullah Ocalan in his Manifesto for a Democratic Civilization, as well as the Manifesto of the Kurdish Revolution. Those texts are fundamental, as well as those who have spent time with him prior to his incarceration, to share and understand how do we embrace this universally, as you have asked us to understand. You have gone back to the Sumerian period, as Abdullah Ocalan speaks to us in his text as well. You have spoken about Descartes. You have spoken about capitalism and the emergence of it as foregrounding the struggles we have today. So this universal account at a global macro analysis is important for us to zone into the critical issues that Leader Ocalan, or Abdullah Ocalan, in his democratic confederalist model, shows us to oppose the nation state. Because nation states, like the Turkey state is doing, seeks to assimilate and eradicate the local indigenous identities of not only the different ethnic groups that you have mentioned, but also when it comes to man and woman. So despite those dichotomies and dialectics that exist, we need to embrace these ideas that would then allow us, because it is Ocalan who has argued in no uncertain terms that the imperative, like you have spoken about, on self-defense is established and must always be ready to defend democratic society, as you have done and briefly pointed out since 2012 and way before that, when Abdullah Ocalan himself was in northeastern Syria, when he was organizing and mobilizing the communities there. And that was the foundation of what has led to the success, to a large extent, to Rojava currently. So that articulation of democratic confederalism and the call for the construction alongside popular assemblies, popular militias, and that being coordinated for the purpose of self-defense is not only a Spartan model of an armed citizenry, but it is of a revolutionary people who must defend freedom and democracy as a light in that region of the Middle East and Western Asia by all and any means necessary. So the challenge then that it poses to the state within which it finds itself, which is the Syrian state, is one of a tremendous struggle, because the inclusivity of the values and ideals that are there in Rojava have not yet been fully embraced by the state itself that this revolutionary project finds itself in. So the model raises many questions about the extent to which it implies the transcendence of capitalist social property relations, as well as opposed to mere taming of excesses that you have pointed out to us in your presentation. So certainly the model that is currently in place is a work in progress, guided by the philosophy and ideals of leader Abdullah Ocalan. The dichotomies that you've pointed out in principle are intact and must still be challenged to reverse what has been taking place there for over a century. Consequently, the divisions of the social order into economic classes that have been developed and entrenched cannot evaporate overnight. So we take comfort from Ocalan when he defines to us that the unity of power relations through which the general coercion and exploitation of the class society is enabled. He then goes on to insist that state organization at its heart, the collective means of stolen property, colonialism, for example, as well as the occupation by Turkey currently in Syria. So following leader Ocalan and his thoughts and ideas from the text, we conceive that the state is a set of institutions whose principal purpose is to preserve existing social relations. And you have pointed out the subject-object relations on many different aspects of your philosophical expounding in the last hour in your presentation, which I'm not going to restate again. Suffice to say that Ocalan spent close to two decades in exile in Syria, when he was forced out in 1998 en route to South Africa, where he was promised political asylum by the late President Mandela. However, he was captured by the international security agencies and handed over to Turkish intelligence agencies. And from then till now, for almost a quarter of a century, we are entering the 25th year of his incarceration. And it is an indictment on all European states, including all human rights organizations that speak of human rights, but have done nothing to alleviate his isolation and incarceration on the island of Imrali. It is a flagrant violation of all human rights law, as well as what we refer to as the Mandela rules for political prisoners. The attempt is to isolate Ocalan so that the subject that's been oppressed in that space is cut off from his greater people. And in his text, The Kurdish People of the 21st Century, he makes it clear to us that he stands for the consciousness and the will of freedom for the Kurdish people. And they are inextricably linked to his incarceration in that way as well. But his resilience and continued struggle, even though he is incarcerated, continues to inspire and give hope to all, especially those who firmly are engaged with the project in Rojava. So from theory to praxis in Rojava is fundamental to understand Abdullah Ocalan's philosophy. So empowered by his philosophy and guidance, it was the PYD that had taken the third path or the third way during the Syrian revolution. And it sided with the democratic forces against those that you named that were inimical to freedom-loving people. And thus being avoided, trapped by the Syrian regime, the PYD strategically interpreted the Syrian revolution correctly and guided by the thoughts and ideas of leader Abdullah Ocalan. So it is then important to understand that this direct democracy, as you are speaking about, through popular assemblies, council systems, rather than the other way around, inspires the revolutionary consciousness and process to take that project further. So you look at your agricultural projects you are busy with that are in harmony with nature, not destructive to it for mere profit bearing, like the other projects that are taking place globally, the control of sea, the GMO industry, and those tools that are used to continue vanguarding capitalist models of state and society and the multinational corporations. It is then important for us, or for me now, to come to conclude that for that matter, it seems likely that even in post-conflict scenarios, the region's eventual incorporation, especially northeastern Syria, the autonomous administration, and Rojava should be democratized in a federalized Syrian republic. It is important to think of that so that there would be a propitious circumstance for making such a break would either be contrary because it would cause a rupture that would undo the gains of the revolution in that part. Of course, the US military presence continues to be an obstacle for some, but it arguably has been there to prevent an all-out Turkish invasion, which is also critiqued by many on the left, as well as scholars all over. So the collaboration of the world's main imperialist powers and NATO, a strong structure that Turkey is part of, has never been chastised or booted out of that structure for its continued genocidal conduct against the people of Rojava, including the Kurdish people within its own borders. So the first lesson we must understand with the conditions of dual power scenario was overcome, and consequently how the revolutionary forces in Rojava established contrary to the hegemony that had been there before. The retreat of the Syrians.
Can you conclude in a minute or so, because we're wanting to take some questions?
I was allocated 20 minutes, so I think I'm still within my time frame, John.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I am concluding now, and that's where I am. So the second lesson I'm busy with is the difficulties of advancing towards democratization of an economic life in the context of a civil war. The proliferation of cooperative ventures, as our presenter has given, and the accountability to the commune seem to have been somewhat dwarfed by revolutionary authorities and reliance upon oil revenues. Those are also important to focus on, because a respondent's function in a seminar is also to raise important critical questions from what has been presented, and I've raised a few of them as well. So the transition towards democratization, then we can conclude, is very much hindered by the introduction of a generalized scarcity that goes along with a war that has not yet been concluded. And of course, remembering the importance of the ecological, the gender, and the anti-war positions that the thoughts of Abdullah Ocalan bring to us. Thank you very much, session moderator and panelists, as well as to Comrade Kochar for your macro presentation to us all. And I must thank the moderators for doing an excellent job for us in English as well. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you so much, Mahmoud. Very, very interesting and thoughtful comments that you've reflected back. There are a number of so many critical questions that could be posed at this point. I have one or two of my own, but I would certainly like to open up the discussion to any comments or questions that any of our participants would like to pose to Hassan following his presentation. If people would like to raise their hand, I can see it and I can include them in the discussion, or if you want to pose a question and write it in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, you may pose a question that way as well. So while people may be thinking about that, if there are not any immediate questions to ask, I have one that I would like to pose. And it deals with this very, very fundamental point that you raised, Hassan, which is how the practice or the construction of democratic institutions consequently dissolves the power of the state. And the second important point you made was around this connection between individual freedom and communal freedom, which is a fundamental dialectic within the practice of politics. And the question I would like to pose is, practically speaking, how does this relationship of individual freedom being connected to communal freedom and the day-to-day practice of democracy, how do we see it working in practice in Rojava? Can you give us an example of how this is actually constructed in how people actually deal with each other politically in Rojava through what is being constructed there?
So now I want to answer this question. Yani, not in a theoretic way, but in an actual practical way. How does this look? And now construction is something a bit like this. Freedom itself is how much you can construct. If you cannot construct anything, you cannot create your own freedom. And that's a reality. That's one of the ways we describe our freedom. However much you can construct, however much you can create and develop, is how much you can free yourself. Whether that's the creation of a new mentality or the creation of a physical institution, it depends on your ability to create, to develop. And so now, institutionally, like how we say that the freedom of an individual is related to the society, and in the same way that the knowledge of the society is the same as the knowledge of an individual. The freedom of that individual is related to his knowledge. And the development of a society is related to individual knowledge. Individual knowledge is, of course, related to his individual freedom. And his individual freedom is, of course, again related to the society's freedom. These are all things that you cannot separate from each other. However, in practice, a person must be communal. And in that communality, must have initiative. He has to have his own force of knowledge. The development of both an individual and the society is related to the force of the society. However strong the socialization itself is the strength of those developments. Socialization develops the force of humanity itself, develops its initiative, develops its constructional power, its developmental power. Someone who removes himself from the society, I don't believe that his intellectual intelligence will develop. For instance, why did science develop? To answer the question, how do we live and how will we die? These things aren't removed from each other. For instance, the criticism between philosophy and religion is, what is life and how can I live in society? And how can I live a social life? And when I die, how will I die? Where will I go? These things are connected to each other. So the force of an individual and the force of society are things that are inseparable. However, in practice, we'll say something practically, we have communes. Communality and individuality. The individual gives his own power to the commune. And the commune itself develops the individuals that are taking part in it. For instance, maybe there are some if you do not have a strongly developed society, you cannot talk about a developed individual. For instance, here we have an identity as an individual, and we have an identity as a commune, an identity as a society. These things are connected to each other. We are a political society. We have two identities. Every individual has two identities, not just his own individual identity. He has his social identity related to his commune, his society, his culture, his diversity. And next to that identity, he has his individual identity, his beliefs, his thoughts. That's also like a political identity seen. Both of those characteristics exist within one person. And so because of that, in practice, the person contributes in the communes and in the communal lives. And at the same time, using his own initiative as an individual to develop society, to develop his thoughts, to develop his own power of development. For instance, there's a saying of Rojava Ocalan. He says this in his defense writings. He says, you can take me out of prison and you can put me in the Garden of Eden. If my society is not free, I cannot live there. And so I can see how he would answer this question. If there is an individual whose society is oppressed, that individual is not free. For instance, in many places, there are so-called individual freedoms. However, we can see that this is a deception. When a human leaves humanity, so does his freedom. For instance, a freedom that takes its basis in cutting oneself off from society is criticized by Rojava Ocalan. And that's why he says, you can put me in the Garden of Eden and I won't go. I won't accept it if my society is not free. A person cannot live without society. Something scientific, you can say, a small kid, a small child. If you leave him by itself, he dies. The thing that protects him is the mother. That's something related to society. And so related to individual society and social society, we can say this.
This is a very Aristotelian conception that no man is an island. Correct? The indissoluble connection between the individual and society. So I'm very, very partial to this original conception of Aristotle as the root of politics as well. Thank you so much for that. I am seeing there are no further questions or comments. May I ask any of the panelists, Mahmoud, do you have anything else that you would like to put as a question or comment to our friend?
At the moment, John, there isn't anything else. I covered my key questions in my response, and I appreciate the time and to respond to the question posed to him by yourself, and look forward to further engagements. We are entering into load shedding here, so I have about another 30 minutes backup left. So thank you.
All right, my friend, thank you for taking part. Okay, I'm going to bring this session to a close. It's been a wonderful interaction and a wonderful introduction to our series. Thank you so much, Hassan, for taking the time to join us. and for the work you are doing. Thank you to Global University for Sustainability, Jade, for helping put all of this together, and for the Center for Civil Diplomacy in Rojava. We have 9 lectures to follow. They cover the whole range of political, social, security, and economic issues that are evolving in Rojava. And I look forward to everyone's participation in the series in the lectures to follow. Every lecture will be taking place on Thursdays at the same time as this. And there will be 2 lectures a month. So I'm going to bring this session to a close. Jade, do you have anything to add to our discussion before we end it?
Yeah, thank you. And our next lecture held on 8th of June, and the topic will be about the philosophy of democratic confederalism and stateless democracy. And the speaker will be Hassan Kochar. As you know, this will be a example of women leadership. So thank you very much.